All right, everyone. Welcome. This is our last forum for this semester for the school year. So thank you for coming. As I talked about, Daniel Wann from Murray State University is our outside speaker. A couple just brief statistics on him. He's been studying psychology of sports fans since the mid-'80s, and he had a particular focus on team identification. Pretty interesting story I learned a few weeks ago about how he got into team identification, and he was really the first person to start looking into what it means to be identified with a team, and was the first person to develop a scale to measure how identified a person is with a team. So he's published 2 books, right? The second edition of one coming out.
Yes.
He has over 150 journal articles, and then he's made more than 100 conference presentations. And so, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dan. Go ahead and take it away.
See if I can break it again.
Oh.
Hey.
Is it reversed?
So Cody, thank you, and everyone for having me here. It is certainly my pleasure to be here to speak to you all today. I will apologize for my entrance and the lack of pomp and circumstance. I just was standing up there. The last conference I happened to be at, one of the presenters actually walked into a presentation full regalia, and then took off the full regalia and actually had on a superhero costume. I won't say who that might have been. It's nice to have been staged up before I even get on stage.
I told you I would do it, Hush.
You did. He did it. Again, he did it. So, as Cody said, I've been studying the psychology of sport fandom for a very long time. And several occurrences in my life sort of got me into this. One that really sticks out was my first year in grad school at the University of Kansas in the doctoral program in social psych. Like every grad student, summers are rough as far as funding is concerned, and the way that I put food on the table and clothed myself was to umpire baseball. And I found myself in Lawrence, Kansas, umpiring 4-year-old girls' t-ball. Anybody ever umpired 4-year-old girls' t-ball? Here's my rendition. Try again, honey. Try again, sweetie. Try again, honey. Looking behind me in the stands, 4-year-old girls' t-ball, I saw 3 parents who had taken out these incredibly expensive scorebooks that you buy at like the Hibbets and the Dicks, and they're keeping score at their daughter's t-ball games. Everybody knows how t-ball works, right? The child hits the ball, and once you convince them that you make left turns in baseball, they go that way, and then they stop. And then the last person to bat gets to do what? Run away red. Very good. So it doesn't take a calculator to figure out how many runs your team is going to score. Count the kids. They're back there with their scorebooks. And I'm thinking, okay, this is an interesting phenomenon we have working here. So I went to the rec office, to the head of the recreation program in Lawrence. I said, I think that this is probably sending the wrong message to the kids, right? That these spectators, these fans are so into this that it's supposed to be a recreational league, and they're keeping score because I guess they run out of fingers to count. I don't know. So anyway, just okay. And so they sent out a message to all the parents and the coaches, no more of this. 1 week later, I'm walking in from the parking lot to the field to umpire a game, and I passed by a parent who's in the parking lot picking up rocks. And I thought to myself, I'm not one to judge, everybody needs a hobby. So I kind of walked past, but you know, when you're umpiring and you know that somebody has a pocket full of rocks, you watch them, right? And so here's what I saw. I figured out that this person, every time there's a shot on his daughter's team scored a run, he would put a rock in his right pocket, and the other team put a rock, and he would take the rocks out and count them and announce the score to the people that are in the stands. It's about that moment that I thought that maybe I should study sports fans. They seem to be a rather interesting bunch. And so that's basically what I've done for the last 30 years. Actually a bit more than 30 now, is study the psychology of sports fandom and sort of what makes fans tick and what's the impact of fandom on the individual, what's the impact of fans on society as a whole, and that's kind of the mode for the lecture today. So a brief overview of today's talk. First of all, why should we care? I always think it's important to frame the discussion as to why would anybody want to bother, right? Why bring me down here to Memphis to talk for an hour about fans? Why do I write books on fans? Why do we have classes on fans? Why should we bother and be interested in this topic in the first place? Then we'll talk about the affective reactions of fans, the behavioral reactions of fans, and then the cognitive reactions of fans, the ABCs of psychology. We'll talk about this in psych classes. We study the ABCs. We want to understand how people feel their affect, what people do, their behaviors, and then their thoughts, their cognitions. And so we'll look at different emotions of fans, behaviors of fans, and thoughts of fans that have been studied over the course of the past 3 or 4 decades. And then I'll finish by discussing a topic, gazing into the crystal ball, where I'll suggest first some ways I think that sport might change in the coming decades that will change the fan experience, and then I'll also talk about some things that are issues that I think and other authors have suggested are understudied, things we just don't know as much about fans as we should and probably would want to further our overall sort of grasp on why fans do what they do. So let's just jump right in here. Why should we care about sport fandom? I think that one clear piece of evidence that suggests that we ought to care about fans and that these are individuals worthy of study is simply the pervasiveness of this activity in society. It is amazing how much our society is sport-bound in literally all facets of society. For example, television, right? So we have the Ocho. This was from Dodgeball a few years back, where they sort of tongue-in-cheek said, yeah, eventually ESPN's going to have ESPN 8. They haven't gotten there yet, but boy, they sure seem close, right? ESPN, ESPN 2, ESPN News, ESPN U, ESPN W, ESPN Classic. I loved ESPN Classic when my kids were young, because they would have those instant classics and show the games the very next day. So we were watching like a game that I knew the ending of last night. Eric would come in, he'd let, "What you watching, Dad?" "I'm watching the ball game. By the way, on the second pitch of this at-bat, Barry Bonds is going to hit a home run." Sure enough, second pitch, whack, hits a home run. "Well, I knew that. This was tape from last night." Eric didn't know that. Don't tell him, by the way, if you see him. He's like, "How did you know that?" "I'm a student of the game, son. I'm a student of the game." That's how I knew. So many TV channels focus solely on sport, or at least at various times will show sport programming. Radio, there's well over 100 different radio stations in the United States that are 100% of the time sport talk radio. That's a lot to talk about. The internet. I often say there's only 2 reasons the internet was developed. One is sport. You can figure out the other one on your own. It's amazing how much content is directed sport-wise. The number of individual hits to the ESPNs, the USA, these very powerful Yahoo. We're talking about millions of hits per month. Individual hits, people seeking out information about sport, consuming sport via the internet. Books. I mean, so many books are all about sport. And I don't just mean like books that are academic, but books that are more for leisure reads that are out there. And then last, movies. And not just sports movies. Yes, there are movies out there such as Remember the Titans and Hoosiers, which, by the way, is the best sport movie of all time. The debate's been ended. You're welcome. What about movies that aren't about sport? I always think about the Harry Potter series. Quidditch. What does Quidditch have to do with any plot in Harry Potter? It really doesn't. You could take Quidditch out of Harry Potter and it would be the same show. But the people that are involved in Harry Potter, the writers and the directors, they get that we are a sport-crazed society, so they shove sport in there to gather the interest of the individuals that are watching it and reading. Okay? Sport is everywhere. That's the point. It's crazy in its pervasiveness. Another reason that we should talk about sport fandom, that we should care about sport fandom and how it impacts individuals and societies, is that it brings people together. I would argue it brings people together in ways that other pop culture and social areas are not able to. For example, it has the potential to bring people together. So Michelle and I met because her seats were behind me at Racer basketball games. And her back and my back and her knees kept getting in the way of each other. One time after we'd been dating for several months, I said, "So what made you notice me?" And she said, "You were in front of me at Racer basketball games. You're kind of hard not to notice." Yeah, okay, I'm loud. I will admit I'm loud. Brings individuals together. You have the ability to integrate interpersonally through Fandom. What happened at Marshall County High School? Anybody know that? That's like 15 miles north of us. And what was interesting was the community's reaction to this school shooting several weeks back. When the other local high schools played, they would wear shoelaces, the colors of Marshall County. And they would have shirts the same color. One would wear the blue and one would wear the orange. Finding a way to use sport to unify people in times of crises, right? Colombia. They've had unrest in Colombia for decades. They've been engaged in civil wars and guerrilla warfare for decades. And they've tried a number of different strategies. The government has tried a number of different strategies to get the guerrillas to put down their arms and come back. And they interviewed one of the leaders of the politicians there and said, what were some of the more successful strategies that you tried? And hands down, he said it was football. What do you mean football? They actually took soccer balls, football there, soccer here. They took soccer balls and had the national team players and coaches sign them and put notes on there, put down your arms and come home. And they dropped them into the guerrilla stronghold areas throughout the country. And it was the most successful strategy that they had to reduce the violence in their country through sport and the bringing together of people. Autism. I think that we have some things that my generation failed at in dealing with in this society. I think there's 3 issues that we're going to have the young people of the world figure out. And to figure out autism, breast cancer, and bullying. Those are the 3 things that our society is struggling with right now. One thing that thinking about and learning about the autism is that autistic kids typically, of course not all, but most, really struggle in social situations. They just are socially problematic. They don't pick up on social cues like non-autistic children will. And they often find one thing that they can kind of zero in on and just dive into headstrong. What they've learned is that they can use sport and sport fandom to bring autistic kids together and give them something that unifies them, brings them together on a common ground. And these kids, when they take them to these sporting events, come out of their shell because they're with like-minded individuals. Right? So actually using sport to bring autistic kids out into the open a bit more in a social way. And I mentioned bullying. So I'm going to give a shout out to Cody and his sport rivalry stuff and Sport Rivalry Man. Not a shout out to Cody as Sport Rivalry Man, his alter ego, by the way, but a shout out to his work with Sport Rivalry Man. They're doing work where they're going into schools and they're trying to use these cartoons to end bullying. Now, okay, not end it, but at least decrease the amount of bullying that you see. Kids will find anything to use as a weapon in bullying, right? Including, you like that team? Why would anybody like that team? My dad says that team is terrible, right? And so his work with Sport Rivalry and the cartoons, the comic strips, we're going into schools and trying to figure, can we actually decrease the amount of the bullying, the conflict going on by teaching kids that it's okay to be different. Now, we're not just saying it's okay to be different in terms of what team you like, but if they understand that that difference is okay, maybe they'll then generalize that to other differences that will also be okay. Sport fandom aids in meeting basic psychological needs. Another reason we should care about sport fandom, it matters. We used to always say, Cody and I always talk about, hey, we're not curing cancer here. Maybe we're not, but we're talking about stuff that actually matters at an innate level for human beings, such as the need to belong, right? Sport brings people together of all backgrounds, all races, all genders, all ages, all nationalities. It brings people together, okay? It aids in this innate biological need we have to belong. We have this desire to fit in. Sport allows us that opportunity. You can go to a game at Murray, you can go to a game at Memphis, and if you're in that crowd, it would be hard to feel lonely. It would be hard to feel alienated or isolated if you're among all these people. You might not know all of their names. You might not know any of their names. But you share in this common bond that you care about. It gives you this sense of belonging. Well, we have this fundamental need to belong. We also have a fundamental need for distinctness. So here we have all these Yankees fans and the two poor lost souls from Boston that are there. Fandom allows you to fit in, but it also allows you to feel distinct, right? So I can be a fan of the Murray State Racers and walk around and feel like I belong because, you know, the vast majority of people in Murray, Kentucky care. But at the same time, I can also wear my Kansas Jayhawks sweatshirt or t-shirt or polo and kind of stand out and be distinct. So I want to fit in, but I don't just want to be a cookie cutter. I also want to be unique. Fandom allows you to do both. It allows us to meet these basic human psychological needs. Okay, so I've sort of plugged why I'm here. Let's get to the sort of the nuts and bolts of the discussion. Looking at the ABCs of fandom: affect, behavior, and cognition. And the first thing we'll talk about are the affective reactions of fans. And we know that when fans like watch their team or see some picture of their team, it can sort of lead to a very powerful affective reaction. Here's an example. What, too soon? It's been 10 years now. You know, like that? This picture. See, this is great. We got he's back here going like this. One guy's going, right? They're slinking down their chair. They're reaching for brownies. They're gunning for me. Right? So you guys didn't play, right? It's not Chalmers' fault that Rose couldn't hit a free throw if his life depended on it, right? You see things like this. It's amazing the affective impact that you get through sports. Even though we're not the ones playing, not the ones coaching, not the ones doing, it's still such a part of who we are. It matters so much to us that we have these very intense emotional reactions. All right, one way that fans react emotionally, obviously, will be to performance. This is where the disposition theory comes into play. A lot of research has looked at disposition theory. Bryant, Zoom, and a number of individuals, many of them from the University of Indiana, have looked at this. And basically, the tenets of disposition theory is this. Your affective reaction is going to be a function of your disposition towards a team. In other words, your connection or identification with a team. And also the outcome. So if you have a strong disposition or identification with a team and they do well, you'll have a very high positive response. If they lose, a negative response. But you get the same thing happening if a rival is competing. So if the rival competes and you care about the team that you love, and the rival competes and the rival loses, we love that. If the rival wins, we hate that. There's actually some research that shows that fans have a higher positive response to a rival losing than their favorite team winning. We just love it when the bad guys lose, at least those people that are bad guys to us. There'll be a theme throughout the rest of the discussion talking about this notion of identification. We're just sort of plugging it here at disposition theory. If I care a lot about this team, if I have a disposition, a connection, an identification with this team, if that team wins, the world is wonderful. If that team loses, the world's terrible. Unless, of course, the rival also lost, then, you know, maybe all is right with the world after all. Types of affective reactions. This is an incredible subset of the research that's been done. Just finished the new edition of our Sport Fan Text. We have a chapter there on affect, and there's something like 40 different emotions that have been studied with respect to sports fans. On the positive side, when you watch your team win, you feel happy, you have enjoyment, you have satisfaction, you feel energetic, vitality or vigor is increased. If your team loses, you feel sad, you feel tired and run down and fatigued, you're disappointed, you're angry, you feel shame, vicarious shame. So I didn't do anything, but I still feel shame because the team that I care so much for, their wins or my wins, their losses are my losses, and we lost, so I feel shame. And then anxiety, very high level of anxiety can occur when individuals are about to watch their team compete. We actually mapped the anxiety of sports fans from 3 days prior to an event all up to the halftime of the sporting event, and found that the pattern mirrors those for athletes. Athletes tend to have their anxiety creep higher and higher and higher, and then once the competition starts, it goes back down. Once they're into the game, they're just fine. The sports fans, if they were highly identified anyway, the lows didn't care. The highs, higher, 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 halftime, back down again, mirroring those that you would see among the athletes. Happiness, enjoyment, satisfaction, and energetic. There's four happily. You got four good ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the sad ones. This is not just what I thought of. This is what the research shows. The research is really interesting, that there's a lot of negativity. If you were to do a column of all the studies that have looked at the negative affective reactions of fans and all the studies that looked at the positive, it's at least 3 or 4 to 1. I know this because I did it. It's at least 3 or 4 to 1 with the negative standing out. Now, an interesting question I have is why? Why so much negativity? Why all this research on the negative side of being a sport fan? Well, one possibility is the negativity bias. We've known from years in psychology that negative things stand out, right? So if you have a favorite food, your favorite is Pizza Hut deep dish pizza, right? And they bring it home, you open the box and a roach crawls out, that pizza's going in the trash can, right? One tiny roach ruins a pizza. If you have a box of cockroaches, one little piece of pizza, I'm good. No, the one thing that's negative is always going to stand out more. Well, it's possible that that's what's happened with the researchers, right? That their experiences as a fan themselves were highly negative, and so they think, well, I must study the negative because that's what everyone does. So it's possible that in actuality, fans aren't more negative in their responses. It's just that the researchers seem to kind of think they were because the negative stood out, and then they studied the negative as a consequence. Another possibility is that James Bond was right. Anybody know what movie?
Thunderball.
Thunderball.
You sure about that, Chris?
He's right.
Knew the
and
question before he asked it.
pass that man a brownie or two. He's absolutely right. One of 5. Okay, we'll pass the tray a bit easier. One of my favorite quotes from James Bond, which is in multiple books, is that the gain to the winner is in some odd way always less than the loss to the loser. The gain to the winner is less than the loss to the loser. In other words, if something good happens to you, you feel better. If something bad happens to you, you feel awful. So maybe there's something to what he's saying. Maybe, from a fan perspective, our positive responses to good outcomes, though there, is not as intense as our negative responses to bad outcomes. And if you look at the literature, when people have done like pre and post test assessments, that's what you find. The line that goes up for like the positive affect after a win is like this, and the line for after a loss is going down. The negative goes way up. So I think there's probably something to this. Yeah, the negativity bias probably played a bit of a role in here. But if you really dive into the literature, it does suggest that our bad days as fans are worse than our good days as fans are happy. Reactions to non-performance events. It's not just that fans respond in a positive or negative fashion to things that happen within the confines of the team's success, but other things also make a difference, like player injuries, ours and theirs, right? So when our players get injured, usually there's a negative reaction among the fans. Not always. There's several examples that are out there where disliked home team players were injured, and the fans would cheer as they took those injured players off the field. Not the best moment for fans, by the way. And then the opposing team fans, we kind of like it when they get hurt. Maybe not seriously, but yeah, maybe seriously. Basically, Schadenfreude here, right? So the pleasure, the joy that we experience at the suffering of others is what's happening. That I really think it's okay if I watch somebody that I dislike fail or struggle or get hurt in some way. We actually looked at this with respect to the Dale Earnhardt crash and death several years ago now, and we asked individuals to recall where they heard about this response. And those who were Earnhardt fans, there were a couple of the questionnaires we had to throw away because they cried so much while answering it, and they did it in ink, it washed out. We couldn't read what they said. The non-Earnhardt fans, like, he knew the risks. He should have been a more careful driver, right? Again, they had no problem with what happened to him. Right? Not saying they were wishing the death, but they were like sort of underhanded in their analysis of the event. Changing logos. Man, do people hate it when their teams change logos, right? And not just the Native American logos that have got to go, by the way. Not just the Native American logos, but any logo. And it's so funny because I absolutely despise the New Murray State logo. And it's been around 15 years now. It's been a while. I like the old one because we love the status quo, right? So it is not a controversial logo. We don't want it to change. But it really is kind of funny because Kansas eventually will change again what the Jayhawk looks like, and everyone, I like the new Jayhawk. I mean, I like the old Jayhawk. Well, that's funny because the old Jayhawk is like the 15th iteration of what that Jayhawk has looked like over the past 120 years. You just think it's yours because that happened to be what it looked like when you went to school. People do not like it and show very high negative affect to when teams change logos. Quit hitting that button. Teams leaving. Oh, my goodness gracious. People get a really sour feeling in their stomach. We have a friend and colleague, Ryan Zapalak, that part of his heart left when the Oilers left Houston. I don't think he's recovered yet. Cody, is that a fair statement? I don't think he is not yet recovered. He needs the help of a clinician. It's not good. And then, paraphrasing Seinfeld. My son had what was probably the worst job on the planet. He worked in the game room at Gaddy's Pizza. Yeah, bless his heart. And one redeeming night, he actually has the best story he could tell. The kid was there playing games and got enough tickets to go up to the counter and buy something that actually was of value. And the kid got up there and his eyes get this big, and he sees the University of Louisville basketball, right? It's like 10,000 tokens, and Kevin counts up his tokens. They put him on the waiver anyway. And he's like, yeah, you have enough for that? And the kid looks at mom and says, I want the basketball. And she went off on the poor young fella and said, no, we are University of Kentucky fans in our family. You cannot have that basketball. She refused to buy that poor child a basketball, and he started crying. Right? He's bawling. So it's an affective reaction. So to paraphrase Seinfeld, no hoop for you. That's good. Basketball Nazi. How do these affective reactions impact us? In many powerful ways. First of all, sport outcomes. When the team does well, you get high levels of positive word of mouth. Right? The individuals will talk up the team, they'll talk attending the team. They're very positive overall about their experiences with the team. And then also increased consumption. This makes sense. If you have a positive experience with just about anything, you're more likely to engage in that specific activity on down the line. I, quite frankly, don't think that's very interesting. Right? That's what I would refer to as no-duh psychology. I think at the more interesting level are the non-sport outcomes, such as outlook on life. When individuals, teams lose, the world is terrible. They did a study a couple of decades ago now, right before and at the beginning of the Gulf War. They had individuals whose national team had lost or won a soccer game. And those whose teams had lost estimated that the Gulf War would last twice as long as the other group, and there'd be 4 times as many casualties. It impacts your outlook on life. Ed Hurt and some colleagues at Indiana had Indiana students watch an Indiana University men's basketball game, and after the game they had to guess how many of these math problems they could figure out, and they had to look at pictures of attractive members of the opposite sex and estimate if that person in the slide would actually go out with them on a date. And when the Indiana team lost, when they watched Indiana lose, like, I can't do any of these math problems. None of these people would ever want to go out with a person like me. It didn't just bother them, it changed their outlook on life. It also changes voter decisions. I think this data set's a little bit scary, but a win by a high-power university team within that district is worth about 2.5 percentage points to the incumbent. We like the status quo. And if my team is winning and I'm happy, let's not change anything. Let's just keep it the way it is. And for NCAA basketball, teams that went further in the tournament had higher levels of evaluation, happier levels of satisfaction with President Obama. My team wins, I'm happy, the world is great, so my president must be great. These are pretty powerful effects, above and beyond, wow, Murray State won a basketball game. And then, what we really care about is money. So at the personal level, an economic outcome is the fact that when teams lose, individuals are so depressed and sad they do not perform nearly as well at work. Their job performance goes statistically significantly down and they earn less. Individuals whose teams do well tend to earn more money at the individual level. At the societal level, stock markets are tied to the performance of national teams. We did a study of 30 countries over in Europe, and when their national teams would lose, the stock markets would go down. Why? Because the people involved in that were depressed, they're upset, and they're this whole pessimistic outlook on life, and I think our economy is going to tank because our soccer team tanked. It's not just how we feel individually, right? It's not just I'm in a good mood or I'm in a bad mood. This stuff is pervasive throughout our existence. Some final points about sport fan affect. First of all, sustained success and failure. If you win a long time, the fans stop caring. Right? That's what happened to the Atlanta Braves. Right? You get this complacency that happens. So the Braves, they always were given a hard time because they couldn't sell out their playoff games. Right? They're very good teams that couldn't sell out the playoff. Because the fans were, we've been here before. We've done this. Show me something new. When we get to the World Series, let me know. Wake me up. I'll go to the game and I'll care. But then you have the Cubs, who hadn't won a World Series in a long time, says the Cub fan standing in front of you. I wasn't alive. I didn't have any relatives that were alive. And we have 5 million people showing up for the Cubs parade in Chicago, the 7th largest gathering of humankind in the history of the world. Showed up to celebrate together after a sport team won a championship because they hadn't won. Now, if the Cubs win this year, I guarantee it won't be 5 million because they've had their day in the sun. Affective forecasting. We are wonderful at predicting which emotion we'll feel. We are terrible at predicting how much we'll feel that emotion. We always expect it to be much bigger than it is, right? If this would ever happen to me, it'd be the greatest day of my life. Everything in life would be perfect. If the Cubs would just win the World Series, everything would be so amazing. And then they get there, and the Cubs win the World Series. But what they forgot was they still have kids who are not doing well in school. The dog still appears to be sick. They're still getting over having strep throat. There's something wrong with the toilet in the house. We forget about these other things in our life that are going on. So fans are really good at saying, yes, if they win, they'll be happy. If they lose, they'll be sad. They think they'll be happier than they actually are. They think they'll be more upset than they actually are. And the last question that still is in doubt is the duration. How long do these affective experiences last? Well, is it a few seconds or a few minutes? The Cubs lose Game 7 and you're like, oh, this is terrible. And then, 5 minutes later, you're like, Seinfeld's on. A couple of hours? Days? Weeks? Months? Years? The answer is, who knows? Because no one tracks fans this long, right? We do know that if you ask fans how long it takes them to come down from the high of a win or build back up from the low of a loss, they say a couple of days. but that's retrospective, and that's a problem, right? We'd like to actually track fans, but that's much easier said than done to follow them throughout, the next year. So when do they actually bounce back? We really don't know. Behaviors. The B part of the ABC is behaviors. Consumption. One thing that they've studied time and time again is consumption. Two powerful influences, we think. We think there are two things that really make a big difference in fans' attendance and television viewership and purchase of sponsors' products, things like that. We think team identification. Again, the psychological connection that we have to a team. The more I care about the team, the more likely I am to consume. That makes pretty good sense. Fan motivation, like eustress, right? So this arousal we get, or escape. I'm going to consume sport because it gives me this diversion from life. We think that these are the two things that by and large drive consumption. How much I care about the team, and then what am I getting out of the consumption? Is it a diversion? Am I into aesthetics? I need the beauty and the grace that I'm watching? Do I need to boost in self-esteem? We think there's a lot of problems with this research. It's been done, but it's rife with problems. First of all, when we attempt to use identification and motivation to increase consumption, we're basing it on literature that's problematic, right? They assess intentions, not behaviors. So you have people in the lab and you're like, okay, how identified are you? Great, how many games do you want to go to this year? And they'll guess. The optimal word there is guess. And we like to assume that intentions equal behaviors. What happens when you assume? Make an ass out of you and me. Right? Clearly, there's a positive correlation between intentions and behaviors. But when you look at the amount of variance accounted for, it's about 20%. That leaves a lot of room for oops. When you're spending money on marketing strategies, that's a lot of oops. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Right? Just because self-esteem, motivation, and consumption are correlated, doesn't mean that self-esteem necessarily causes the consumption. Maybe consumption causes the self-esteem. Or maybe there's a third variable out there that causes them both. Or maybe it's reciprocal. Or maybe, in all likelihood, it's mediational. Because after all, everything is mediated by something. We don't have a clue. And really, at the bottom line problem is, what are you going to do with the information? Even if you find this causal pattern, even if you know that identification matters, and these motives matter, what are you going to do with it? So, why am I a fan of the Kansas City Royals? Why? Want to help Michelle? Why do I like the Royals? Grew up there. That's great. A marketer could really use that if they could control where people live. Otherwise, you're like, oh, next. Okay, so why am I a fan of the Kansas Jayhawks? Ph.D. Marketers. Wonderful. All I got to do is control where people get into grad school, and we're all set. Oops, that's probably not going to happen. Why do I like the Racers? Got a job there. All I got to do as a marketer is control where people work. That's probably not going to happen. Why do I like the Cubs? You say because I'm awesome?
No, because they're awesome.
Because they're awesome. You would have been right either way. My dad grew up south of St. Louis. My older brother, because my dad was a Cardinals fan, also became a Cardinals fan about the time I was 5. A 5-year-old's job with an 8-year-old sibling is to mess with him in any way possible. So I decided I would like the Cubs just to torment my older brother. So basically, I had my dad to blame for 50 years of anguish. All you got to do as a marketer is be in charge of where a child's brother's dad grew up. Go Bucks. Why am I a fan of the Ohio State University?
Marriage?
Yeah, because I'm not stupid. If If I'd have presented this talk 4 years ago, I'd have stated say it to you. There's nothing I hate more than the Ohio State University. I hated them. And then I got romantically involved with one of their grads who knew I didn't like him, and as a joke, because she has a sense of humor, on our second date to walk around campus, wore an Ohio State sweatshirt. As I walked up to her, I looked at her sweatshirt and I said, never before have I had so many reasons to get a sweatshirt off a woman. And yet she married me. Here's my point. You can't leverage that stuff. You can't leverage that stuff. It sounds good to say, hey, we're going to use identification to increase consumption. And I'm not saying you can't have marketing strategies that focus on these things, right? You can focus on where you grew up. You can focus on where you went to college. But that's as far as you can take it, right? You can have a focus on the consumption, the marketing, but you can't do what you would really like to do, which is directly impact the actual driver of identification. Aggression. Another behavioral reaction that we talk about quite a bit in the research is aggression. Lots of different variables have been found to facilitate aggression, such as modeling violent sports. You get higher levels of aggression when you watch violent sports. Arousal, we get pumped up, excited, that heart rate gets going, the blood pressure gets going. It increases the likelihood of aggression. De-individuation, we get this mob mentality, the cover of darkness, this sense that no one can identify us. We lose our sense of self-awareness, so we would do things in these de-individuated conditions we wouldn't otherwise do. Names of rival contests, stuff that Cody and I and our colleague Rick Grieve have looked at, where they have these highly aggressive names of rivalry games, the such and such war or battle. That might be enough to trigger cognitively, to prime cognitively some levels of aggression. And after 18, 19 iterations, we think we have finally figured out exactly how this goes down. Frustration from bad calls, right? I mean, that's all it takes for a fan, is a bad call. And they remember them forever. Forever. Cardinals fans are still talking about Dinkinger, right? That was the 1985 World Series. And it was a bad call. It's a good call. So what happens then is you're supposed to use the bad call brick. Hallmark put these out a couple of decades ago. A bad call brick. And under the display, it said, for throwing at the TV when a bad call is made. Isn't that cute? So basically, that's like enabling the aggression of fans with our ever popular bad call brick. 3 particularly powerful variables. This, by the way, is a picture of an Ohio State University riot. Alcohol consumption. Let's just go ahead and be honest, right? It matters. We know that. How many studies do we have to do? It matters. But what are you going to do about it? Let's get rid of alcohol sales at, I don't know, Coors Field, Busch Stadium, Miller Park. Good luck. Team identification, very powerful predictor of the amount of violence. The more I care about the team, the more those teams' outcomes are a consequence to me, and the more violent I'm going to be. And then third, we were learning within the last couple of years about this notion of dysfunctional fandom. These are fans who are highly confrontational. They complain a lot. They were bullies as kids. They're very assertive. Basically, they're the jerks that are there that always seem to be the person sitting behind you whenever I go to a sporting event, except for racer basketball. Plug that one. These individuals feel that it's their job to let the coaches and the officials know that they were in the wrong. Superstitions, the thing that fans often do are superstitions. We did some research over a 10-year period. The funniest study I ever did, we have over 1,000 superstitions of sports fans, not athletes, but actual fans. Perceptions of impact, they thought it mattered. Scale was 1, doesn't impact the outcome at all. 8 has an absolute guaranteed impact on the outcome. Over 1,000 people, the average was 5.5. 5.5. They're like, I have to do this. It mattered. Types, apparel, far most common, right? They would wear the lucky shirt, wear the lucky hat, and if they didn't and the team lost, they would take the blame. It's my fault. Why do you wear it? Because if I don't, I'll jinx the team. It's my fault. Vocalizations, rock, shack, jayhawk. People would say things. Why do you have to chant that? Well, because if I don't, it will bring bad luck to the team. And then actions. SpongeBob here is picking his nose because of the booger hex. The booger hex, by the way, is a fact. This is not just superstition. I've perfected the booger hex. You put your finger in your nose, you flick a booger at the free throw shooter, and they miss an incredibly high amount of time. Enough that in our section at Racer basketball games, if it got close, all the fans around would be like, damn, booger hexing, booger hexing, booger hexing. I'm like, I'm a scientist. Booger hexing, yeah, I probably should, because you never know. It could be fact. I bowl in a league with one of those fans. To this day, he still is trying to get me to booger hex the other team's bowlers. How silly is that? I mean, I do it, but how silly? Cognitively, we cope through biased cognitions. Right? This is the cognitive side of Fandom. We cope through biased cognitions like the self-serving bias. When the team loses, it's the ref's fault. When the team wins, it's an internal attribution. It's the team was successful. They played hard. They had a high level of ability. Right? So it's not that my team lost because we're bad. It's because the refs cheated us. A favorite of all UK fans out there. Biased perceptions or recollections. We think that the future is better than it's going to actually be, and we recall the past as better than it actually was. If my team is terrible now, I can have really low rose-colored glasses looking forward and make myself feel better and cope, or I can go, oh yeah, remember the glory years? Yeah, they're not as glorious as we think that they were, right? But that's okay. It helps us get through the rough times now. Pessimism. We are retroactively pessimistic. We think, oh, I know we lost, but now that I think about it, we never really had a chance. They were a team of destiny. Everybody who lost to Sister Jean and Loyola Chicago, they're all saying that now. Not that we were bad, we never really had a chance. Plus, they had Sister Jean. Proactive. As the event gets closer, we're more likely to think that we're going to lose to save face in case we do. Gazing into the crystal ball. Conclude with a couple of final points we'll talk about. Changes on the horizon that could impact the experience of fans. And then also topics that I think and some of my co-authors think need more attention among researchers. Changes. Technology. It is really different, right? The way we are a fan now is completely different than the way it used to be. Used to be, when I grew up, you couldn't wait for Saturday afternoon because you actually got to watch a Major League Baseball game. There was one, Tony Kubek and Joe Garagiola, and that was it. Now, I don't know what kind of cable package you have not to have baseball on your TV. Plus, all of the internet access, the social media, people across the globe are now consuming together. That's never been before. And you think the changes have happened now, you wait. Because virtual reality is coming, and it's going to change what life is like as a sports fan. You don't have to be there to actually think that you are there. The safety of players and fans. The concussion issue is going to change football. It already has. It's going to change it even more. Because parents don't want their kids to play football at near the rate they used to. They're playing other sports. So the number of people that watched football, watch their kids play football, is going down. The number of kids that play football is going down. Those are fewer fans that are going on. Look at the ratings of the NFL. TV ratings the last couple of years. They're down by 10%. We've already seen this happen. And then the legalization of sport gambling. This is also going to happen. Within 10 years, you'll be able to bet on sporting events legally everywhere. The major sport leagues and the NCAA fought this at first, but then they realized, wait, it's probably going to make people more interested in sport. Now they're kind of jumping on board. They're kind of falling into a bandwagon of, hey, let's take a look at this. Arguments were read before the Supreme Court last December. We'll see what they say in the next coming months. Most experts expect the Supreme Court to vote in favor of allowing other states to use this as a way to generate revenue. Topics that need more interest from sport and social scientists. Changes in fandom across the lifespan. We don't know a lot about this. We don't know how having kids impacts parents' fandom. If you have kids, now you got to spend time with your kids. Does that decrease your fandom? Because you have less time. Or maybe, once your kids start to play sports, it increases your fandom. We just don't know how moving and life changes impacts the pattern of being a fan. We need longitudinal research, and that just really hasn't been done to date. We need cross-cultural research. That research that's been done on fans cross-culturally, boy, there are huge differences. 90% of all of the research on fans has been from English-speaking nations. And what has not been done is really different. Not different big picture, different little picture, right? So we need more work that says, hey, it's different other places. Positive sport fandom. We know so much about the darker side of fandom. We know about the aggression, and we know about the fact that maybe they have trouble at work because they care too much, they don't go in, and maybe they have a hard time with their spouse, things like that. We don't know near as much as we should about what fandom brings positively to the individual and to society at large. It must do something right for a society because it's such a powerful force in society. It must help us do something to meet these societal imperatives. Otherwise, it probably would have been evolved out of society long ago. It's nearly universal, so it must be doing something, but we just don't have a lot of information on that. A lot of the research has looked at the negative side of things. It's only in the last about decade or so the researchers decided, hey, let's find out what it does right as well as what it does wrong. And last, fandom and evolutionary processes. Last about 5 years, individuals have begun to talk about, hey, you know what? Maybe being a sport fan also taps into evolution. Maybe through evolutionary processes, we have learned that it is beneficial to the species to actually pay attention, to watch, to learn through observation. If I'm a fan, I'm probably a part of a group, and groups help with aid in survival. There are people about the last 5 years that have taken an evolutionary perspective, the biggest picture of all, to try and understand what fandom is doing, to place it within evolution and say, maybe it's not just about belonging to a group or being distinct or having a chance to escape. Maybe it actually benefits survival at large. And with that, I will ask if you have any questions. Or one of the brownie. Fire away.
I want to go back to that Murray State booger hex. That's not real, is it?
Okay, you have to operationally define real. Is it real to the extent that I think it really works? No. Is it real to the extent that I really do it? Yes.
You mean want to keep that on the down low?
Yeah, it would be really nice to have kept it on the down low. I actually was talking about that recently, a couple years ago, to an author who, his book just came out on sports fans, super fans, and he actually talks about my booger hacks in the book. So it's not just no longer on the down low, it's out there in public knowledge. So I think that the next step for me is sometime for probably a pre-test, post-test control group design to establish the booger hacks as a true phenomenon and to save my face. That's all that's left for me.
Nice.
You know how many times I flipped a burger at Jalen Rose in the 2008 NCAA championship game? You couldn't hardly see the screen anymore.
To your James Bond quote,
Thunderball.
right, do you think that has something to do with expectations? So the player or the fan has an expectation of winning, or it identifies as a fan?
Yes,
that would
I
be-
think absolutely has to. And the research shows that you're spot on. That when a fan expects to win, and they do, the affective reaction is not as great as when if they don't expect to win, and they do. So as an underdog team, if my team, okay, who was the 16 seed that won? Surely
UMBC.
Who?
UMBC.
Yeah, thank you. Maryland team. Those fans surely didn't expect to win versus Virginia, right? That's a much higher level of affective response because of the lack of expectation, right? Virginia, they lose to a 16 seed, that's a horrible thing because they probably figured not that it was guaranteed, but I'm sure they didn't expect to lose to a 16 seed.
You're absolutely right. Expectancies do play a role. And what's interesting is it plays out across time, right? So the more I win, the more I expect to win, the more that loss is devastating. But the more I lose, then when I win, the greater the gain of that win as well. But since overall, people probably expect to win, there's the pattern effects that you're talking about. Exactly. Research bears that.
I was thinking about, half the people here are in hospitality. So I was trying to compare some of the effective components that you feel in a game with similar events in hospitality. I would compare it to a vacation, maybe a 1-week vacation. So you think squeezing a 1-week vacation, the effective component, into a 3-hour game is what's happening. And maybe, because when I take a vacation, I almost come back remembering every single day and the emotional up and downs I had. But in a sporting event, I forget it after a week. Even though I'm a fan of the sport, I know they're going to play another game next year, so we'll probably go through this. So do you think anybody has done research in that area?
A couple of things in response to that. First of all, I often will say that I don't think that there's necessarily anything magical about sport and the processes that we discuss, right? So expectancies happen all across the board. It certainly happen with respect to vacation, right? You expect your vacation to be good, and then when it is, you're like, yeah, that's a good vacation. And when it's not, you're like, that's the worst thing that ever happened to me, right? If you go on a vacation, you're expecting to be terrible. The first time I went to Disney, I expected not to have a good time. I had a really good time, which made it that much better. Oh, no. Who in this room likes Disney more than you do?
Nobody.
Bet me. 21 trips in a 9-year period. No, I need a 12-step program. I need a 12-step program.
He owns that stock.
How we've not been there together is really strange. So I think that you're right. I think that if you look at the vacation aspect, that's probably, now that I think about it, for me in Disney, that's not that good an example. But it's probably something you only do once every now and then. Right? So you're going to have more chips in that pot for that trip versus, any sport just about. But, maybe if you're thinking about somebody who's a huge fan of World Cup soccer, maybe that comes around infrequently enough that you get the same response. And maybe that's why soccer fans are
rabid.
Yeah, that's a good. I was going to go with nuts, but okay, you can go with rabid if you want.
21 times in 9 years?
Yeah.
How many times have you gone in just 1 year, the most? It was an average.
I think 4.
4.
But no, in my defense, I'm on the board of directors for the National Alliance for Youth Sport, and they're down in Florida, right? And sports side conferences were often down in Florida. So how many vacations would I like just me go? I mean, too many, but
So you
the
did
minority.
just go to Disney, because he's been struggling with that.
How we try to join that board.
Find out how much it
Bi-monthly
costs and talk to Sharon.
Yeah, I like me some Disney. Too much, I think, probably. Yeah.
Yes. Well, first I was in the building when Chalmers hit that shot, and it did feel like I played in the game.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So I'm sitting there with my son next to me and my older son on the floor, and he looks up at me and he's like, "Did we lose, Daddy?" And I said, "The only chance if they miss all the free throws." And my kids will remember that like it was yesterday, and it was not.
Anyway, in one of the classes I teach, I discuss with the students the concept of role engulfment, how it doesn't just apply to athletes and coaches, it applies to fans certainly. And we talk about how you can identify so much with a sport, with the team, that you start to neglect other roles in your life. There can be some very unhealthy or irresponsible habits that you form as a result. So I was thinking health fields can take a variety of measurements on a person, body weight, cholesterol, blood pressure, things like that, heart rate, and let that individual know that, okay, you're starting to approach dangerous territory if you stay at this level or continue to get worse.
Right.
So is there any kind of measurement tool to measure someone's fandom to where you can say, you've now reached a point where your fandom has gotten so extreme that it could start to impact other aspects of your life.
When they paint their faces, you know, it's a bad
Starting
sign.
to get there.
Tim still paints his Oilers colors.
Love you, Blue.
Blue? Yeah, I got an email from someone completely out of the blue on Monday. And they said, I read about you in this new Superfans book that's come out, and I'm really struggling with my fandom. And they're like, you know, I know you don't know me from anybody, but, you know, could we begin up a conversation? I'm like, yeah, sure. You know, what's going on? Sent me a dissertation of all of the ways in his life that he's struggling because he is too much of a Packers fan. That if the Packers are on Thursday or Saturday or Sunday night, he takes off work the next day. And that his wife and kids know don't go anywhere near him. If they lose, he is miserable and possibly around for the next 24 to 48 hours. This time of the year, he says he's the worst because he seeks out so much information about the team and potential draft picks and whether they go to free agents, that he's even worse now. He's like, I don't know what to do. And you know, my response to that was, well, from a sport fan, social scientist perspective, there's not much to say. There's not much to say because you at that point probably ventured into the clinical realm, right? You are now, they would never want us to say, the clinicians would really bristle when you say that there's an addiction because they want an addiction to be something physiological. But they are more than happy to say you may have now ventured into the realm of an obsession, right? To where what you're doing is no longer healthy, it's now maladaptive to the rest of the components of your life. So is there a tool that we could use that would measure that within the realm of sport fan psychology? There is not. There are tools that if I saw all of your different scores, I can maybe get a hint. If I see that you have a perfect score, the highest score possible on my measure of identification, and the highest measure possible on our score assessing fan dysfunction, I don't know if you're having a problem within your life because of your fandom, but I know one thing, I'm not sitting next to you at a sporting event because you know you're going to get us all kicked out from what you do. But in the clinical realm, I guarantee you, they would have things that they could assess that would say, look, this is now too much of who you should be. It's a very small minority of fans. But I would argue that if you have one person who is maladaptive in this, you have one person too many, right? And then something probably should be done. But it's clinical at that point. And you're right, there's these health indices that are pretty clear.
So would that fall into the same family of like video gaming disorder?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. You know, again, I'm not a clinician, but thinking about what the DSM would say, I'll say maybe because the video gaming, at least you are an active participant in it, right? So those games are set up geniusly from a psychological perspective. You're on a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, right? If you play long enough, you will actually win. Just long enough that then you want to buy the next game, right? That's a little bit different than a fan who, even though we think we can control the outcome, and we will do whatever we can, you know, superstitions and yelling and booing, right? The bottom line is we can't really do anything, right? So I think they're related, but there's that whole control issue that I would argue would make it more problematic for the fan because you know, the video gamer can just get rid of the computer. If you're obsessed with sport as a fan, what do you got to get rid of? Well, your internet, TV, your cable package, your cell phone, because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Well, I mean, if you're addicted to sport or obsessed with sport fandom, you couldn't be in this room because you got the Memphis basketball poster right there. It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
All right, thanks, Dan.